Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the IDEAS Seminar Series. I'm Jennifer Britton. I'm manager of the Center for Informed Democracy and Social Cybersecurity here at CMU, working under Dr. Kathleen Carley. I'm happy to introduce our speaker today, April Lawson. April leads the Debates and Public Discourse program at Braver Angels, a national citizens movement dedicated to strengthening democracy by decreasing political polarization. April has been with Braver Angels since its founding in 2016. She designed the Braver Angels debates and has grown the program from its first debate to serving over 1,000 participants per month. She oversees a team of 50 volunteers and staff to administer all Braver Angels debate work and is a lead voice in public-facing communications. Previously, she provided research and editing for David Brooks's weekly columns at the New York Times. Most recently, she co-founded and served as Associate Director of WEAVE, the Social Fabric Project at the ESPN Institute. April grew up in Kansas, studied anthropology at Yale, and now lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband, Dan, and their dog, June. Welcome, April, and take it away when you're ready.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's great to be here. I've really been looking forward to this because my understanding is that your group focuses on a number of different things, but including among them misinformation and disinformation. And I have a theory about what is actually going on with the sort of misinformation and disinformation world that I would love to, I'm basically going to articulate to you and try to persuade you of. And then I'll be really interested to hear your reactions and whether you think I'm right, whether you like what your questions are. And yeah, this is an unusual kind of group for me to get to talk with, and it's a real pleasure to be here. So thank you. So I will, I'm now gonna talk for a little while and then we will go to questions. So here we go. Do you ever ask yourself, why do people believe fake news? Do you ever look at the crazy stuff people seem to swallow, the obviously false information that people seem to sometimes take as gospel and just wonder, how can this be? Why on earth do these otherwise intelligent people, assuming the best, believe this stuff? Now, if you talk to them about it, as I often do because that's my job, you will find that it's usually because it comes from a particular source that they trust. But here's the million-dollar question. Why do they trust that source? So today, I'm going to try to convince you that the availability of misinformation and disinformation is only part of the problem, and it might not even be the most concerning part. The bigger half of the problem, and the one that may tear not just our factual understanding apart, but may actually tear apart the nation, is about trust. The news about trust in America today is pretty bad. We don't trust the media anymore, that's true, but we also don't trust the police or doctors or, dare I say the word, Congress. But it's actually worse than that. We don't trust each other. For the last several decades, sociologists have measured what we call social trust, how much you trust your neighbor. And we are rapidly changing from an unusually high trust society to an unusually low trust society. David Brooks, my old boss, wrote a good article on this in The Atlantic recently, so I'm going to quote him in a couple places, including here. In 2014, according to the General Social Survey conducted by NORC at the University of Chicago, only 30.3% of Americans agreed that most people can be trusted, which is the lowest number the survey has recorded since it started asking the question in 1972. Today, a majority of Americans say they don't trust other people when they first meet them, end quote. Now, that might not seem like a big deal, but high social trust is correlated with all the things we want in society. On an individual level, living embedded in a web of trusting relationships is the strongest predictor of most of the outcomes we all want: long life, happiness, higher income, healthy children, and more. And on a societal level, the effects are enormous. So to quote David again, high trust societies have what Francis Fukuyama calls spontaneous sociability. People are able to organize more quickly, initiate action, and sacrifice for the common good. When you look at research on social trust, you find all sorts of virtuous feedback loops. Trust produces good outcomes, which then produce more trust. In high trust societies, corruption is lower and entrepreneurship is catalyzed. Higher trust nations have lower economic inequality because people feel connected to each other and are willing to support a more generous welfare state. People in high trust societies are more civically engaged. Nations that score high in social trust, like the Netherlands, Sweden, China, and Australia, have rapidly growing or developed economies. Nations with low social trust, like Brazil, Morocco, and Zimbabwe, have struggling economies. As the ethicist Cicely Bach once put it, whatever matters to human beings, trust is the atmosphere in which it thrives. So social trust is correlated with everything from economic prosperity to artistic flourishing to the ability for us to come together to fight major societal crises, such as, for example, a global pandemic. One of the scariest signs to me of our level of polarization, and one of the things that makes me believe our civilization may genuinely hang in the balance of all this, is our reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic. Often, when you ask people, well, how do you unite two warring groups? The answer is give them a common enemy. How do you unite Americans? World War II. Okay. The global pandemic should have all the characteristics of the kind of threat that would make us come together. But our polarization is so bad that it has caused us to fracture more. And that's a pretty dangerous sign. So on an information level, which as I understand is part of your area of focus, I can't remember whether it's Stalin or Lenin. I'm not going to get this quote perfectly, but he once famously said that to destabilize a society, you don't need to make people believe false facts. You don't need to make them believe and follow a bad leader. What you need to do is make them not know who to believe. Because, and this is me, not Stalin, when that happens, people revert to lines of loyalty and trust that are not only less like lower quality and less likely to be accurate, but frankly, they're uglier. They have to do with race, class, perceived strength rather than perceived goodness, that kind of thing. So if you can destroy lines of trust, you can destroy a society. You don't even have to attack it. You can just wait for it to internally collapse. Now, what's interesting is that America has always had the risk factors for a low trust society. We've always been an incredibly diverse place, especially by world historical standards, united more by political philosophy than by blood or culture or any meaningfully universal experience. We've also always had the kind of oppression that is fuel for any intergroup fire. But we've also had some unusual gifts. We've been blessed with a level of economic prosperity distributed across classes to keep mass desperation largely at bay. More importantly, America has, from the very start, had a very unusual level of what Alexis de Tocqueville called voluntarism, a strong tendency to create local organizations that serve the good of the community, and then to expend enormous effort to maintain them. America has always been the land of the bake sale, the PTA, the local sports league, the soup kitchen, the Elks Lodge, the church, eventually the labor union, the Rotary Club, etc. There's an author I respect named Mark Dunkelman who referred to these as middle ring institutions. So the first ring, the first ring is the people that you know in your intimate circle. So those are your inner ring relationships. The most distant ring, the far out one, is people that you only interact with through one way, through one vector. But in the middle ring relationships and institutions are all the people that you see that you don't really know well, but you see them at more than one place. The people whose kid plays on your kid's softball team, and they also serve on the PTA with you and go to your synagogue. Or the guy who lives a few blocks away, who always shows up to remind you about local elections and competes against you at that table over there every week at Thursday night trivia. So America is known as a melting pot nation, and more recently as a salad bowl, but it begs the question for me as a visual person, what's the pot? Where is the melting pot? Where's the bowl, the salad bowl? In other words, how do you take an incredibly diverse set of people and get them to interact enough to like and respect each other, at least well enough to get along? And you guessed it, the answer is middle ring institutions. For decades, America has taken people from totally different parts of the world with different religions, different assumptions, different languages, different cultures, and brought them together through practical, immediate ways to improve and support their communities. America is also a very pragmatic nation, which has meant that we really focus on projects and we come together to work on specific, to build the playground for the school, that sort of thing. The last big factor here is that among the institutions that bring people together, perhaps the strongest have been churches and other religious institutions, and those are also in decline. So the PTA, the local church, the Elks Lodge, I imagine that many of you are young, and all of this, I understand, particularly to young ears, may sound a little bit corny. But the truth is that these institutions have been the most powerful engine of American pluralism. They are what have taken the ingredients for constant strife, all that diversity, and turned them into the most dynamic force the world has ever seen, especially economically, but also arguably artistically. The problem we're facing is that and in other words, what those institutions do and what the melting pot and the salad bowl do is they create spaces where repeated interaction causes trust to develop. And that's why when they disappear, trust goes way down. So those structures that support the dynamism are in enormous trouble. In the early 1990s, Robert Putnam wrote a famous book called Bowling Alone, that talked about how bowling leagues and that kind of thing had gone away. Mark Dunkelman I think maybe 10 years ago, wrote this book about middle ring institutions and how they are becoming essentially a thing of the past. Institutionalized religion is in historic decline. Although a majority of Americans would still tell you they're Christian or Jewish or whatever, the number who actually attend services every week, which is where you get all those benefits, hovers down around like 10%. I think it's between 10 and 20%. And meanwhile, trust in our major institutions has also decayed, arguably following those institutions becoming lower quality, regardless. And more of life has moved online to a space that by its nature brings out not our better angels, but the nastiest, most vitriolic aspects of people. And that brings me to the vector of social division, one of these like sort of trust destroyers that I focus on most directly, which is political polarization. So Braver Angels, my organization, was founded in 2016, but the world has changed since then. I'm going to take a moment to lay out how the world now and political polarization look from our vantage point. The world, many people had sort of hoped that once we had a new presidential election, all of that, things would get better. But I'll tell you how it looks, at least to me and to some degree to us. So since 2016, political polarization in America has by some measures intensified, but more, it's evolved and become more complex. We're in a new place, but if anything, it feels more dire. A lot of Americans see this landscape. A 2016 war framed in political terms has transformed into a more noxious 2021 war over culture that has erupted into violence from school board meetings. I imagine that some of those, that's applicable in many of the places that you are, all the way to the United States Capitol. A yearning for justice on both sides and narratives of righteousness have hardened into a battle mentality that admits no shared identity or common purpose with the other side, transforming discussion into concession, nuance into weakness, and empathy into treason. Our work around bridging is thus newly perceived not just as a fool's errand, but as actively immoral, damaging to justice, the nation, vulnerable people, the Constitution, and the good. As ideology has fused with identity, our stories about ourselves and who we America are have become not just different, but irreconcilable, and in some cases, seemingly actively oppressive. Cultural cohesion is a joke. A dangerous disease ravages the land, but our institutions have so thoroughly lost our trust, and we're so divided on facts that we can't agree on how to fight it. So instead, we turn on one another, fighting our neighbors as though they were the disease. Sometimes, when we look to the rising generation, so often a source of hope and inspiration, it can seem like they're the most vitriolic of all, on both left and right, taking polarization as a necessary casualty of reforming society to a new and unforgiving moral vision. They can appear to be agents most deeply embedded in the war. And in the midst of all this, as the years drag on, ordinary Americans are tempted to lose hope. Where in 2016, the crisis was, if daunting, at least clear, concrete, and centralized. In 2021, it seems like a battle on many fronts, everywhere and nowhere, from critical race theory in schools to corruption of our voting systems to a media industrial complex whose power and utter lack of integrity seems only to grow. And we have a vague sense that what we love about our country, our dreams for it, and the whole project, frankly, are slipping through our fingers as we stand by feeling helpless, seemingly moving frantically and expending great effort, but getting nowhere. The last few years have worn on us. Americans are fatigued, more and more of them opting out of the public conversation altogether, abandoning the public square to the screeds of hateful yet seductive minds. As my favorite poet, W.B. Yeats, put it, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. At least that's what we are tempted to believe. That's the poison we've swallowed, and that's what we have to rise to fight. It's also important to acknowledge, again, speaking more to your areas of expertise, that there are domestic and international actors actively fueling our polarization for different reasons. In the current media environment, where we are all flooded with information from hundreds of sources 24/7. So the scarce commodity is no longer information. Now it's our attention. The two most reliable ways to cut through the noise to capture our attention are fear and outrage. And for those profiting off of our attention, the fear and outrage they create are simply byproducts of their true goal of capturing attention. In contrast, for key international actors, the discord is the goal, not a byproduct. They not only seek our discord, they promote the idea, and this is important, they promote the idea that it is futile to fight against it. So for most Americans, they experience this toxicity as something that is happening to them and to the country. And I think, I don't know about you, but this has at times been true of me, and I bet is true of many of you here. And if you feel like it's happening to you, it's much harder to believe that it can change. The truth is that this is a process in which everybody on this call and everybody in our country has a part to play. And so that brings me to Braver Angels. So in brief, Braver Angels, which is my organization, is a national nonprofit that seeks to serve the country by helping people bridge the partisan divide. So we refer to Reds and Blues. Red means generally conservative, tends to vote for Republican. Blue means generally liberal, tends to vote for Democrats. What we do is we're very grassroots focused. So we have volunteers in all 50 states, and we have 85 local chapters. Every one of them has a red leader and a blue leader. And we are basically, it's interesting because Braver Angels started in 2016 with a single workshop where people tried, our leaders, it's actually a funny story. David in New York called David in Ohio, in rural Ohio, and said, hey, the day after the 2016 election of President Trump, and said, what is it like down there? Because here in New York, it's basically a morgue. And what David in Ohio said was, really, that's interesting because my neighbors are talking literally about hope and change. And David said, I asked my next door neighbor who loves President Trump, what do you hope President Trump does? And he said, I hope he unites the country. I hope he brings us together because we're so divided. And so what I hope comes clear in that to some degree is that there are people, the people want hope and change, and they want unity. They want to come together. They have the same desires and very similar hearts. They just have different languages. And so the founders of Braver Angels decided to say, well, what would happen if we got 10, at the time, Trump voters and 10 Clinton voters into a room for a weekend? What would happen? Let's see if we could help them talk to each other. And they called our third co-founder, Bill Doherty, who's a leading family therapist and marriage counselor, who had just spent the year experiencing more divorce cases than he'd ever seen walking into his office because of politics. And he said, oh, guys, I don't think you know what you're in for. Let me help you with this because there's a lot here. And so they did this workshop in southwestern Ohio with these people on both sides. And it was an amazing success. People loved it. There were tears were shed. There were there was one pair of people who I particularly loved, this like very traditional Christian man who can't say 4 words without saying Jesus, and this Muslim immigrant who decided that they would each visit the other person's place of worship. And this really powerful thing happened. And then there was an NPR story on it. And what started happening after that is that people called in and they said, hey, I'm in Albuquerque and we have that problem in a big way here. Can you come here? Hey, I'm in Nashville. Hey, I'm in Dodge City, Kansas. Hey, and what we've learned is that we don't have to, there are some causes where you try to lead people and make them believe that something's a problem. This is not that. Everyone knows this is a problem. And there are a lot of people who really want to do something about it. The only thing we have to do is give them tools. And so actually, there's one other thing we have to do. We have to walk the walk. And So you know how I mentioned that we have reds and blues, and so we have something called the Braver Angels rule, which is that at every level of our organization, from funding to our leadership team to our board, we are half red and half blue. And that's because we know that we've got to do the work. We have to work through the conflicts. We have to like go through the awkwardness about the thorny issues and how can you possibly support that person, all of that stuff, if we want to have anything to offer. And so all of our local chapters have one red leader and one blue leader, and that's really important to how we approach this. Beyond that, so the reason that I say all this is because what Braver Angels is really about is building social trust, rebuilding social trust, keeping polarization from destroying it further, and giving people the chance to come back together. Because I think that it's a sort of foundational level problem in our society. And unless we get this right, I don't think any of the rest of it is going to get better. So we generally offer 3 kinds of tools. The first is we provide empathy building experiences. These are workshops. They are actually founded literally on marriage therapy techniques. They tend to be very emotionally powerful for people who participate, and they help people see into the people on the other side. Like, who are you really? And why? What is your real reason? Tell me about this. And it gives people a chance to be heard and to listen. The second thing we do is we try to give people skills, like tangible things you can take away and use in your real life conversations. So for example, paraphrasing is a useful technique. And what that is, so you ask questions of curiosity. That's one of our rules, is you've got to learn the difference between a gotcha question, which is, why do you support somebody who's objectively awful, and change it into a question of curiosity. Why do you support this person, right? Another tool would be paraphrasing. So that's where you, somebody tells you what they believe and you say, let me try to say this back to you. I hear you saying da 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 da. Is that right? Did I get you? And that's great because it helps people feel heard. And frankly, it helps you see if you're wrong and they'll correct you so that you can actually get to come to like to having an actual communication, basically. And then the third category is we focus on healthy conflict. And for you all, I'm going to focus on that third one, and particularly on how we do this in an online environment, because that's my specialty. So I founded Braver Angels Debates and Public Discourse program in 2018 because I loved the organization, but I saw that there was a need for people not just to see each other's humanity, but actually to navigate specific issues and real conflicts. And I wanted to create a place where people could bring forth all of their passion and all their personal experiences, their desire to persuade the other side, their real heart, and to give them a chance to have it out and engage the tough issues, just to do so in a way that treated everybody with dignity. So I designed Braver Angels Debates based on a style I learned in college, and they're pretty different from what a lot of people think of when they think of the word debate. So a lot of people think of like a presidential debate or maybe the kind of competitive debate that you do in high school where like you get points and one team wins and one team loses. And our debates are a little bit different. The biggest difference is in the spirit of it. We say that what we're here to do is this is a collective search for truth. So there's no winning, there are no teams. You're expected to show up as an individual and bring your conscience. And to that end, the number one rule of our floor is that you say what you believe. And we mean all of it. So we invite you to say only things that you do believe. You're not trying to make a case. You're trying to say, this is why I really think this is true. And we also encourage people to admit doubts and that kind of thing. Rule number 3, everybody in the room is allowed to speak. So I think y'all are on college campus. And so that would mean that we do a lot of work on college campuses. And that would mean that, it's not just students who get to make speeches. If the janitor raises their hand, they get to speak. We've had our videographer give speeches. We've had the president of the university show up just to watch, but then end up giving a speech. And the idea is like, we're all in this democracy together. And so everybody's voice belongs in the conversation. And there are a couple other parliamentary rules that we use that I won't get into unless you want me to, but basically we try to, what seems to happen is that we create an environment that feels deeply fair to people, where you speak and you are heard and you listen and you hear. And people are invited to bring it all. And, but with a few simple rules, the most important of one, I actually will go ahead and explain this, is that everything has to be said in the third person. So when I'm the chair, it's everything is said to me. And so you don't say, Bob, how could you believe that? You say, Madam Chair, Bob said X. I'm wondering why. And so with a few rules like that, people seem to have an experience that is fair and really just enables them to hear and to learn. And it's really interesting because on many issues, healthcare, immigration, things like that, people walk away saying, oh, we have all this common ground. Like, what can we do with that? That's a lot. That doesn't happen on every issue, but on many of them it does. So Braver Angels at this point has grown to reach, we have, I think, about 15,000 dues paying members, but many, 10 or 15 times that, folks who participated in our events. And debates themselves have been participated in by something like 20 or 25,000 folks. And I want to show you, I want to tell you the story of our most controversial debate ever. And then we'll bring it back to information and what that has to look like in this kind of debate and this kind of conversation. So you may recall that around this time last year, there was a presidential election and that it was contested, and that a large portion of the country believed that the election was stolen. And that seemed like a real threat to the stability of the country, to the peaceful transfer of power. We had January 6th, all of that. And so Braver Angels is about bridging the divide. And we pride ourselves on being willing to actually talk about the real stuff and actually invite into the room all the stuff people really think. We say that we don't, our goal is not to change your views, about issues, it's to change your views about each other. Although secretly people also sometimes change their views about issues, because that's what happens when you open your ears sometimes. So the Trump supporting red members of my team, the debate team, came to me and said, look, I know that there are all these other topics, but we can't take this organization seriously if you don't at least engage the fact that we don't think the government is legitimate right now, that we think that this whole election is a sham. This is a kind of a make or break issue for us. And once they said that, I knew that we had to debate it. And I knew that people were going to be unhappy, which they were. As soon as we announced it, resignations rolled in from members. We got emails from our board. We got emails from funders. We actually ended up holding a public staff meeting about this on our podcast, where we debated, or we just talked through why are we doing this? Because the Blues had I think a reasonable argument that we were platforming what was then called the big lie, an idea that was dangerous, perhaps to the solidity of our country. And also, it was accurately and fairly brought up that that people of color were mostly on one side of this issue and not the other, and that that the American history is riddled with cases where white people make peace at the expense of people of color. And so all of that was going on. And we did this podcast that seemed to help people believe that we shared the same values they did, even though we were having this debate. But the opposition continued to rise. And in a minute, I'm going to show you a clip of this debate so that you can see sort of what it looked like. It got to the point where the day before the debate, my boss called me, the president of Braver Angels, and said, I think maybe we should cancel. And I basically said, wow, is that an order? And he said, no, it's a suggestion. And I said, okay, thanks for the suggestion. And we went ahead with it. And what happened, so I now want to show it to you. I just want to show you a clip of it so you can have a sense of what this looks like and feels like. And then we'll talk about what the results were. So I'm going to share my screen. Give me just a moment. Alrighty, this worked a moment ago. There it is. Okay. By the way, this video is still in process. It's not the most polished thing ever, but it will give you a sense of what this debate was like.
Braver Angels' fundamental job is to rebuild social trust. So with a round of jazz hands for everyone here, come on guys, show me your jazz hands, thank you. I'm gonna call this debate to order. On the topic resolved, voter fraud is a major problem in US elections. And I have been in conversations with the red side of that, particularly the folks who supported President Trump. And they made really clear that the only way that if we're going to be a serious organization that actually intends to like bring the country together and talk to reds and talk to blues and talk to everybody, that we have to talk about the 2020 election.
I do believe voter fraud is a major problem, and I believe it's conscious, organized, and that the last presidential election was significantly corrupted by coordinated effort.
And it all started with just one guy with a bald-faced lie that started before the game even got played, because Donald Trump made the claim about cheating before a single vote was cast, months before anything happened. He said cheating will happen because he knew he was going to make this kind of approach.
If the quarterback from the other side in a game 4 years prior, Hillary was who she was, also raised allegations of cheating and actually spent, with congressional support, millions of dollars investigating it. Is this not a problem of the system rather than one really hyped up and ramped up individual telling lies? Because is it not possible that this is a systemic problem that needs to be addressed systemically, not as an individual?
The facts are that Russia did interfere in our election. And the only question was whether Donald Trump was in cahoots with them or not. And so it's not the same. There was a lot of evidence that Russia interfered in our election.
It's impossible to engage America right now without acknowledging the fact that a lot of people think that the US government is essentially no longer legitimate because the 2020 election was stolen.
If we are to bridge the divide, we have to start from a common ground and have mutual faith, a mutual faith effort to seek truth.
What did you learn tonight, and what did you most enjoy?
What I learned is that the issue of suppression is completely integral to the issue of fraud, and they have to be addressed simultaneously and systemically. And what I enjoyed is a passionate debate on an extremely volatile topic with courtesy, with kindness, and with thoughtfulness.
I respect the guy, and I like what he had to say, even though I really disagree at a hardcore level, and that means something to me.
What I most enjoyed was the civility of dialogue from different vantage points.
Well, that's all the more reason why we need a United States of humanity. We need it, the United States of humanity, the sum of every part.
All right. So that's what that debate looked like. And it actually had quite a few people in it. In cutting together this video, we focused on two of the people who are most polarized against one another, David, the pro-Trump guy, and Silas, the one who was saying that, Trump planned to make the claim about cheating and all of that. And what's interesting is that to this day, Silas and David, I'm not sure I've ever met two people who disagree more, but they're very sure about one thing, which is that they like each other. They have to admit it. They disagree about everything under the sun, but they are friends, actually. And it's what that means then is that they both listen in a way that they wouldn't to the claims of the other side. And so I want to come back, like I said, to bring this back to information. So I'm going to pull this video up one more time and take it and find a particular moment in it.
Braver Angels rebuild. Resolved, voter fraud is a major problem in US elections. And I have been in conversations with...
All right, we're looking for something by David Iwinski.
Talk to Blues and talk.
Voter fraud is a major problem, and I believe it's conscious, organized, and that the last presidential election was significantly corrupted by coordinated effort.
And it all
So my question for you is, what do you think would have happened if I, as the chair, there is a parliamentary structure for correcting people about incorrect facts. It's called a point of information. What do you think would have happened if I, at that moment, had interrupted David Iwinski and said, actually, the 2016 election was not stolen. There's this court decision and that, there are all these reasons that we are sure that the 2020 election was not stolen. The answer is not that David would have been persuaded. It's not that he would have looked up the sources I cited. It's not that he would have thought, oh, I haven't heard that before. Let me think about that differently. The answer is that he would have been alienated. And so the way that we approach information and disinformation in our system, with Braver Angels debates, is that we focus on building trust first. And so I actually, when I chair debates, I never say this fact is correct and that one's not, because I know that we're dealing with an environment of no trust. And when there's no trust and you're an authority and you intervene to assert something, you alienate people rather than persuading them. And so my contention for you all is that as important as it is to try to shut down sources of disinformation, it's even more important to build the social trust that will enable people to be open to the right sources of information and to believe, to have the, I think ultimately that every human being needs belonging, and that generally when people are sort of going down the QAnon rabbit hole or whatever, what they're finding there is belonging and an ability to feel righteous, like they're in the right and everybody else is in the wrong. And until we rebuild social trust, we will not have a way to give those people a place to belong and a way to belong that is pro-social and that involves believing in science and believing that the 2020 election was in fact legitimate and all of that. I'm showing my own biases here in terms of my own positions, but and if anybody wants to contest them, that's totally fine with me. But my basic thesis for you is this. The fundamental problem with misinformation and disinformation, the information breakdown, particularly online in America, is about trust and social trust more than it is about the availability of incorrect facts. And that if we really want to fix this problem, we have to build those relationships back to where they need to be. And the way that I do that in my own life is through Braver Angels, and Braver Angels debate particularly, which is again all about having conflicts but having them be healthy. And I would invite you to join me either in Braver Angels or in other aspects of your life, because I really do think that this is a strong thing to say, but I really do think that the fate of our country may actually depend on it. So with that, I know that we wanted to do some Q&A, so I will cede the floor in my parlance for that.